It's October, the beginning of the application cycle. Most premeds are nervous, refreshing their Gmail every second for the first interview. But not these premeds. They have 5 interviews to Mayo, WashU, UCSD, Cornell, and Vanderbilt, all top 20 medical schools. In this video, we'll learn from their real applications to find out what is working right now to get premeds into top medical schools. All right, so let's just hop into extracurricular number 1. It's a medical mission volunteer, only about 70 hours here. You'll see that I highlight things in blue, green, and red. This is a brand new framework that we've been developing, and I call it the 20-40-40 RIR framework. R standing for responsibilities in blue, impact in green, and reflection in red. And this is a nice structured way to make sure that every work and activity you write hits on all the major points and does so in a way that is weighted in the correct way. We don't want work and activities that are 80% responsibilities, because all you're doing is just telling me what a medical mission volunteer is. We want to make sure that the majority of our writing focuses on impact through stories and data and reflection, just telling the writer why this extracurricular matters. So let's just go through this work and activity and see how it breaks down. So for 2 weeks, Blank facilitated distribution of primary care, vision screening, dental care, women's health, and medication from 4,000 patients from Blank rural provinces. So in blue here, this is what they are doing. If I asked you, what do you think a medical mission volunteer does? They would probably say something like this. Oh, they help with screening or providing supplies. And this is exactly why the responsibility section is the smallest section of the writing. It's because as a reader, you've already known many medical mission volunteers. You've read 2,000 scribes and EMT experiences. So I don't need to read an entire 700 characters describing what a medical mission volunteer is. I need to read maybe 1, 2 max sentences, and we move on our way. The majority of your writing, you'll want to be in this 40-40 impact and reflection. Impact can be broken down into 2 things. Data is queen, and stories are king. And so you can see I highlight in green here examples of data. Every medical mission volunteer can say that they distributed primary care, did some vision screenings, dental care, and women's health, but how many know the exact number of patients that they served? And when you say something like 4,000 plus patients in 2 weeks, then the scale becomes more apparent and the impact becomes more clear. To be fair, what's the difference between any old YouTube channel that teaches organic chemistry and Khan Academy? The difference is the scale. Khan Academy gets millions of viewers every month, and that smaller YouTube channel may not get the same amount of reach. And this is why data is important. It paints you as the authority. It gives you the ethos. You just really sound like you know what you're talking about when you have real numbers and real specifics. So I translated for patients and educated them on dental hygiene and risk factors for diabetes and heart disease. Again, it's a responsibilities thing. It's telling you what he's doing. And there's just really not much more to that. It's one of those sentences where you read and you think, oh, okay, that's cool. And next, we hop into a story to demonstrate the impact. On a rain-soaked day, I wheeled an elderly lady who traveled 3 miles on her son's back to arrive at our site. Again, how many medical mission volunteers are there? There are tens of thousands that apply to medical school every year. But how many of them worked with this elderly lady on a rain-soaked day and knows about her background, traveling 3 miles? On her son's back, her son carried her to get to this medical mission clinic. Her blood sugar was a high 246, and she was quickly given insulin pens and a wheelchair. One of the most common gripes that premeds have about the written application process is that 700 characters is not a lot of space. And they're right, it really isn't. However, when you use stories, when you use data, you can convey a ton in just a matter of 2 sentences here. When you paint a story and bring the reader into that scenario with you, there's a lot that's unspoken that the reader now understands. The gravity of the situation, just how hard it was to get this lady to the site. Those details come off the back of the stories. And ultimately at the end, even if you can tell your story, the most important part of work and activity is a reflection on why it is important or how you have grown from it. And you'll see here that due to non-existent health education and infrastructure, her potentially fatal diabetes went unnoticed. Her predicament showed me the urgent need for medical care and community health in neglected populations. That is a great reflection on how these 70 hours impacted his journey to medicine. And this is a disciplined, well-structured 700 characters that gives the reader a great sense of who the reader is, what types of experiences they had in this country, and why it mattered to them. Now we'll start getting into some of the really fun, creative, most meaningful stuff. Here is an extracurricular where the author is a magician for 280 hours and anticipated 125 hours. And there's a ton of beautiful writing here. When I started learning magic, I found solace in practicing tricks on my ailing father. His favorite trick involved a deck of cards turning to glass in his hands. When I first performed it, his exclamations of awe briefly melted away his pain. As I performed to a larger audience of up to 400 guests, I saw how magic created moments of wonder that offered a respite from life's challenges. Inspired by this, I embraced my role as president. I started a program at a hospital. Along 5 musicians, I led the initiative in uplifting kids with magic. To date, over 200 children have been captivated by enthralling magic tricks. There's a sense of wonder here in this extracurricular, and some of these details are what really brings it out. Magic inherently is a very visual art, and describing those tricks in his writing just really makes it come to life. Imagine a deck of cards to an ailing father that suddenly becomes glass as he's holding it. I love these phrases where he's reflecting on how his father's awe briefly melted away his pain. You can imagine this young 18, 20-year-old male who is working on his magic tricks, and he's completely motivated by the fact that it may be one of the few things that really gives his father some joy during this really difficult season of his life. And here again, you can see how data plays a role in making you sound like an expert in your writing. Performing to large audiences of up to 400 guests, over 200 children that they performed for, a team of 5 magicians going into a hospital, working with kids and showing them magic tricks. Couple the data with some stories, the story of the deck of cards turning into glass, the imagery of awe melting away some pain. Those are the things that give you that ethos, that authority, that visual imagery that brings the reader in and gets them excited about what they want to read next. If you remember nothing else, your job as a writer is to ensure that the one sentence you write gets the reader to the point where they want to read the next sentence. If you can guarantee that, this one sentence makes them want to read the next sentence, you'll have them read the entire thing. Then moving on to the most meaningful here, each week, chronically ill children arrived, seeking respite from their stay. John, a 12-year-old boy with Crohn's, often spent weeks cooped up in the hospital, but when his signed card disappeared and reappeared, folded up inside my mouth, his eyes opened wide with amazement. Thoughts focused on the miracle he witnessed. The joy in his face reminded me of the positive impact a simple trick could have on his emotional well-being. These tricks were more than illusions. They were moments of healing and connection, giving him my deck of cards and teaching tricks for him to pass the time with. Weeks later, he created and performed original tricks, filling me with indescribable joy. I felt inspired seeing John focus on a world of misdirection and illusion instead of one with masks, alcohol swabs, and sterile nitrile gloves. Weekly volunteering, holiday shows, lively community. As we brought emotional healing to patients, I realized how medicine goes beyond treating symptoms. It involves building rapport and trust with patients. So here again, you can see that the writing almost sounds musical. There's this flow and rhythm to John, the sick boy with Crohn's disease, cooped up in the hospital, and now his signed card disappears and is reappearing inside of my mouth that's folded. There's a miracle, there's joy, there's emotional well-being. And then that story charges the reader with the context that they need to understand these reflections in red. Remember, green impact, red reflection, blue responsibilities. So you can see the symbolism, you can see why magic really matters to him, right? It's more than illusions. They're moments of healing and connection. This is how he bridges that deck of cards to the sick patient in front of him. There's a beauty in breaking the magician's code for these sick kids so that they can share the same joy that he has practiced thousands of hours to get to. And I love contrast in writing. Anytime you have the ability to put two things next to each other, they really tell their own stories. So you can see a world of misdirection and illusion paired and juxtaposed with masks, alcohol swabs, and sterile nitrile gloves. When people talk about show, not tell, this is the exact way a writer can show you they understand what it's like being a patient in the hospital. They understand the patient-physician experience and buzzwords like that, right? He is proving that to you by showing you a kid understands a world of masks, alcohol swabs, and sterile nitrile gloves. And it is his role here to replace it with one with misdirection, illusions, and cards. Personally, this is one of my favorite working activity sections, and this is the first time I've shared it. I know, and I'm going to get ahead of this, I know that so many people in the comments are going to say that this is powerful only because it is unique. But I think that's the wrong takeaway. What's important here is how impactful it is. This could have been a non-unique extracurricular. Think about things like piano, guitar, running, tennis, anything that other pre-meds will undoubtedly have. This is not a special extracurricular because it's magic. It is a special extracurricular because of the detail of his stories, the decks of cards turning to glass. It is impactful because he performed to a large audience of 400 guests in an auditorium. He built a team of 5 magicians. He's put on shows for over 200 children, and his reflections are so mature and pointed. Those are the reasons that this extracurricular is world class, and it has nothing to do with how unique the extracurricular is. If you did this again with a running club with people in the hospital, with a guitar for people in the hospital, it would have had the same exact impact. So don't make the core mistake that pre-meds make every single year and chase uniqueness without impact. You have to chase impact first, and if it happens to be unique, then so be it. But if it happens to not be unique, then that's also okay. And here now is an extracurricular that I think we could have actually done a little bit better on. This is a oncology lab research assistant studying glioblastoma. Glioblastoma is the most aggressive brain tumor with a dismal 7% 5-year survival rate. And here we're talking about radiation therapy efficacy, molecular pathways, AMCAS, glucose uptake, GLUT3, translocation, post-radiation, Western blots, flow, GLUT3, surface expression, serine, glycine, biosynthesis, 1-carbon metabolism, antioxidant role, key enzymes, SG deprivation, SG diets, intracranially implanted GPM, harvested brains to produce in vivo data. Oh man, try to say that 10 times fast. So I wrote here, these are all in blue. These are responsibilities, right? And it's difficult to interpret for most AdComs because again, not only are you just sharing what you do, but what you do is in a very specific niche field that the majority of people do not understand. And so while you opened with a very relatable first sentence that we could all understand and appreciate, the rest of it may not be for everyone. Now we move on to the most meaningful experiences here. Research humbled me as I fumbled with many lab techniques. And a key here when you are watching these types of videos or reading other people's applications is have a keen eye on things that you find exciting and have a curious eye on things that you find boring or unclear. So immediately when I read this, research humbled me as I fumbled with many lab techniques. But as I saw my father struggle with an illness, I energetically pushed on, attaining the proficiency to design my own project. So that sentence might fly if you kind of skim through it, but on deeper reads, it doesn't make complete sense, right? He's struggling through research, but his father is sick, so that pushes him to continue working on his research and his lab techniques, and eventually he gets good enough. So maybe this makes sense. Does his father have GBM? He doesn't. Are the lab techniques fully relevant to his father's illness? It's kind of unclear. And this is the point that I want to make here, is that having a second person is very useful in the writing process. At Pre-Med Catalyst, we think that writing is a team sport. And it's because that second person does not have blinders like you do. This person spent 1,250 hours and is going to spend nearly a total of 2,000 hours in this research experience. And so they understand these sentences like it's a 5th grade children's book. But for most people, that paragraph and these sentences, there's a little bit of ambiguity, there's a little bit of unclearness here that is only apparent if you did not spend 2,000 hours here. And so when he's talking about moving towards the possibility of scientific discovery and cures, or talking about refined drug amounts and sketching flow cytometry grades and ANOVA tests, a second person would be helpful to say, hey, I don't actually understand this, I'm confused, or maybe I'm bored, or I'm just really not sure why this is relevant. Ultimately, our team saw this and we still made the joint decision to try and highlight some of his scientific strength. For medical schools that were heavy research focused, these sentences would make a ton of sense. But again, for many medical schools whose AdComs are clinicians, this may be very isolating and push a lot of people away. So I just wanted to share this to remind you that writing is a team sport. And when you write your own application, you'll want to have someone in your back corner to tell you, that's really interesting, dig deeper, or that's really confusing, clean that up a little bit, or that's really boring, I've heard that a million times, you don't need to tell me this. A couple other phrases here that I wanted to highlight: applying creativity and critical thinking, let me lead discussions at weekly meetings, developing clever solutions, carefully communicating findings. When you start to get into this language where it's kind of broad, there's no specific numbers, there's no specific stories, and you start to see the same thing repeated a couple of times, those redundancies are maybe a sign that that the same idea is being repeated and we should try and develop the idea a little bit more. Or there's a sign there that the extracurricular may not have had as much depth as we would have liked it to. So be wary of those redundancies, because it can make the reader feel like, oh wait, I just read that, why am I reading that again? And then at the end here we have, I hope that supplementing a career in medicine with the continued and deepened engagement in research, I can make a healthy life a reality for my father and individuals facing similar hardships. I mean, I think this is fantastic. The only kind of core issue here is that this lab and the techniques in this lab aren't totally relevant to his father's illness. And so it's a little bit of a stretch. There's a little bit of an overextension to medicine and clinical practice. Again, it's totally fine, but I do think some readers will remark on the fact that that bridge is not very crystal clear. So remember the goal here. Is it to sound smart in your writing, or is it to be understood? Because this paragraph sounds very smart, so does that paragraph. But it came at the cost of being understood. Most readers will not fully appreciate every single piece of the serine glycine biosynthesis and 1-carbon metabolism antioxidative role. Both are valid, and you have to remember what schools you are applying to. UCSF will likely have someone who really appreciates this piece. Mayo, Cornell, UC San Diego, Vanderbilt. Remember, at the top of this video, I told you those are the types of interviews this guy is getting. Not only are they top medical schools, but they are also heavy research focused. Notice that he did not get an interview yet, at least, to UNC, which is one of the best primary care medical schools in the nation. So remember your audience. If you're speaking to a medical school that is highly interested in conducting research, there will be AdComs that can really appreciate what you're writing. But if you're aiming for a different kind of profile and you want to make sure that you're not being painted as this super strong researcher, because I imagine not all premeds are, what if you change this experience and you wrote it like it was a explain like I'm 5 entry that described GBM and cancer metabolism? This would feel very different. It would sound very different. The goal of the piece would be very different. So I just want to put this entire context in your mind that remember what med schools you are targeting. If you're going for the UCSF and Harvards, it should sound like this. There's of course things that we should clear up here with some of the phrases that are a little bit too broad and confusing and redundant, but it should sound closer to this than and explain like I'm a fifth grader or a 5-year-old type of entry. Far too many pre-meds forget that their school list is 25, 35 schools deep with all different missions and all different priorities. And you have to remember that while you're writing, because that directly influences the style and tone and goals of your writing. And the pre-meds who don't take that seriously end up writing something like this for the wrong school. My life as a pre-med changed when I started to understand how to write a strong medical school application. Tens of thousands of pre-meds every year make critical mistakes during the application process. So if you want to maximize your odds of getting interviews like these by October, schools like Mayo and WashU, or full tuition schools like Einstein, Kaiser, and NYU, it's no secret, but you're going to have to write the best application you can. And we at Pre-Med Catalyst help with this. If you're finding this video helpful, you might find working with us even more valuable. More information in the link in our description box below. All right, so we have extracurricular number 4 here, tennis supervisor. And I just wanted to share how a application who has gotten 5 interviews by October, AKA one of the most competitive applications this cycle, can have many extracurriculars that look just like this. And by that, I mean run-of-the-mill, 96 hours, just tennis, right? Let's read it together. Massive fan of Roger Federer, watch his highlights, drilled myself after school, watch YouTube tutorials, close attention to detail, teaching over 60 lessons in clinic, remember my joy when a student hit a massive kick serve, gratifying, furthered their love of tennis. I'm going to be very honest, there's not much here, and that is okay. Not every extracurricular has to be world class. In fact, at the end of this video, I will have shown you 8 total extracurriculars, and you will likely only remember 1 or 2, and that's okay. That's how medical schools remember this guy as well. But you can't be sloppy with these extracurriculars. You have to stay disciplined. You still see the numbers where you can. You still see the reflection. You still see that there's minimal responsibilities or what a tennis instructor does. Everyone knows what a tennis instructor does. And so this whole thing can be what a tennis instructor does. Next, we'll get to the extracurricular that I think caught the eye of most of these top medical schools. It's 840 hours, 270 anticipated, and it's an international nonprofit that basically helps small businesses that can't access banks. They work together with student programmers, graphic designers, and finance analysts to expand our impact. He proposed an expansion, and in 2 years, it's become 20 chapters, 500 students who drive social change. So if you'll notice, the majority of this first part is actually should be blue in responsibilities. It's telling you what they do. And I think this is okay because an extracurricular like this is not common for most pre-meds and certainly not common for medical schools and ADCOMs. Basically, what this person does is they act as a bank or strategic consulting firm to help small businesses. And because the majority of doctors won't really understand the team of a student programmer and a graphic designer and a finance analyst, there needs to be a little bit more time and explanation. But now we're on the same page, and it's okay to extend your responsibilities to that 30% range max from 20% if you're working on something that most people don't understand. But please, I promise you, everyone knows what your EMT, your general chemistry TA position is, your scribing at a dermatology clinic. We all know what those are. Moving to the most meaningful, our chapter supports clients up to $15,000 and a 10-week pro bono strategy consulting project. To date, we've guided 15 small businesses from tech startups to bookshops. And he talks about supporting Maria, a first-generation immigrant and owner of a New York travel agency. She had been struggling, and there's a 40% decline in revenue since the pandemic. That makes sense for a travel agency. She was daunted by the complexities of online business. This is, again, where that second person comes into play. She was daunted by the complexities of online business. Not only is it kind of complicated writing, but it doesn't really make sense. So my first question is, what does that mean? And they answer it immediately. So we patiently aided in boosting her technology literacy. But still, I would still question like, oh, okay, well, how did you aid? How did you boost this woman's technological literacy? And I also would have written this sentence in a lower grade level. No need to boost literacy or daunt by complexities. So how do they do it? We taught her to leverage social media reach with elegant and cohesively themed posts. I actually think there's an opportunity here to share like a short link, like a bit.ly of Maria's actual Instagram. So you can see the actual types of posts that they were able to help her with. We revamped her website with an automated appointment booking software and customer engagement features like step-by-step guides and timelines. Okay, so this is fantastic. This is why you need a second person. This is why writing is a team sport. Because you'll write something, we'll have a question. And because we have a question, there was an answer by the student. And because we still had more questions, the student continued to answer it, right? And most pre-meds would stop here. She was daunted by the complexities of online business, or they would stop here. So we patiently aided in boosting her technology literacy. And they would have these blinders on and be like, oh, everyone understands what I'm saying here. But that's not right. You need a second person to say that. So how did you help her? Or what exactly did you do? Can you explain that to us? And that question, that how or what did you do, that leads to these answers, which naturally push the reader to the next sentence. Writing is a team sport. You need two people so that another outsider can tell you where they get stuck, where they get excited, where they get bored. All right, this all led to a 43% increase in site leads. 2 months, she excitedly reported a $1,827 increase in March profits. That's fantastic. It was incredible to see her relief. So there's some reflections. And then I learned how powerful outcomes are on the other side of taking the often scary first step towards intimidating projects. And this makes sense, right? You're a pre-med applying to medical school. Why in the world are you helping people up to $15,000 and spending 10 weeks on helping a New York travel agency get their feet off the ground? And the thing is, what I appreciate is there's no overextension into medicine. You could have easily said, these customer support skills and this operation management and leading a team taught me how to lead a team like a doctor would in the hospital. And I just hate those conclusions because we're just forcing it right now. We don't have to overextend to medicine. It can just be an activity that you liked to do and you learned a lot from, and that's it, period. It doesn't have to go into the hospital. It doesn't have to be overextended into clinical practice in medicine. You can stop right there, that you learned how doing really awesome things for other people are on the other side of taking the scary first step, because you're not sure if it'll work, towards intimidating projects, period. That's it. All right. One of the most fantastic extracurriculars, again, not because it's unique, but because he was able to show us step by step the level of impact he had on one of 15 businesses in this Maria story and her travel agency. All right, next we have a Boy Scout summer camp counselor. Most of us, again, will know what that's like. So as an Eagle Scout, organized week-long Sierra Nevada trip, Boy Scouts, Younger Scouts, camp counselor, mentoring 12 children, archery, climbing, swimming, STEM, working closely with other counselors to ensure campers felt like they were part of a family. They partook in camp activities, great joy, enriching experience that I received as a Boy Scout, 187 hours. Another reminder that not every extracurricular is the most meaningful. There's a reason there's only 3 of them, right? That means there are 12 of them that are not most meaningful. And even if this seems so standard and blasé and normal for you, you can still get into schools like Stanford and Mayo and all this other stuff. In fact, this guy has 5 interviews by October. Mayo, WashU, UC San Diego, Cornell, Vanderbilt. And yes, even with an extracurricular like this, even with an extracurricular like tennis. And it's because there are 2 or 3 things he is most well known for. And the rest of his extracurriculars, he is still disciplined in writing. He still follows best practices. You'll still see the 20-40-40 RIR here, right? There's 1 or 2 sentences about what he does. That's responsibility. There's green, stories and data. That's the impact. And at the end, there is reflection. That's 40% as well. Campers, family, camp activities, great joy, enriching experience that I had, closed the loop when I was a Boy Scout. Now I am a Boy Scout counselor, right? 20, 40, 40, RIR, stay disciplined, even if it's not the most impactful experience for you. And another extracurricular, biology learning assistant. If I covered this entire thing and I just showed you biology learning assistant, you would know exactly what this entire experience is. And so again, not every experience will stand out, and that's okay. 200 students, LA team, expectations, learning habits, LA, ease their worries, great. There's reflection, there's impact through stories and data, and there's a short sense of responsibility. So I'm only showing you these in contrast or juxtaposed with the magic experience, the business consulting experience, so that you remember that these medical students who do very well, they're very focused in 1 or 2 or 3 things max. That's what they're remembered for. And on the side, they do some of these other things that they just like doing. They don't do it for 30 hours a week. They do it for 5 hours a week or 2 hours a week, and they're good at it. And when they write it, they're disciplined with it. And that entire picture paints their application. And lastly, here we have extracurricular number 8. You guys will notice this if you have watched my content in the past, but if you have not, it's Vietnamese community health. And the reason that it's remarkable is that on my own application, Vietnamese community health was featured. And so the point that I want to make here, you can read this for yourself. It's about health sites, health fairs, 185 patients, 23% uninsured, 56% spoke limited English, which again is fantastic data. And some awesome reflections here. Some thought nothing was wrong if they didn't feel sick or afraid that getting Medicaid would threaten their stay in the US. Those are real fears that Vietnamese immigrants have. The point that I'm trying to make is that for this person's application, it was not most meaningful. It was a minimal amount of hours. He had less to say. He was a volunteer who enjoyed his time. But this is my application. And you can see here that Vietnamese community health was a huge part of my application. There's the quote, there's the data, 150 patients, 10,000, 30,000, 37% no insurance, 48% didn't speak English, 60% hypertension, all this other stuff. I was the finance director. I earned $21,000 through 12 funding bodies. You can see the data. Even 4 years ago, we were writing with data. And you can see this entire reflection paragraph that health is a longitudinal battle and all this other stuff. You can read this and get a sense of just how involved and engaged I was in this extracurricular relative to how this student was engaged in the same extracurricular. Remember, this is the exact same club, right? But we have 2 vastly different experiences. And what that means is that it's not the extracurricular. People think that there's a magic extracurricular you log into or you join and that gets you into medical school. That is not the case. It is your engagement with the extracurricular that matters. It is not how unique or how competitive or how special the extracurricular is. It's not the fancy title or your leadership position. None of that matters. It's your engagement and your impact and your reflection in the extracurricular. And that is why it's called the RIR 20-40-40 rule, with 80% being the impact and the reflection, and 20% being the responsibilities or what you are doing, right? This extracurricular was okay, good for him. But this same extracurricular was the entire reason I got into UCLA med school. The other interesting counterexample is that I was also in the Magic Club. And he turned that into a 400-person large audience performance and a team of 5 magicians that went into the hospital and performed magic for 200 kids. But me, that same club, I left. Probably because I sucked. This That's all there is to it. But the point here is that it's not the extracurricular. You can get into Mayo and Harvard and Stanford and all these fantastic schools with any extracurriculars, so long as your impact and your engagement and your reflection matches the caliber of those top medical schools. So that was an application that earned 5 interviews by October. That's the beginning of the application cycle to schools like Mayo, WashU, UCSD, Cornell, and Vanderbilt. Those are all top 20 med schools. And together we learned frameworks like the 20-40-40 RIR, Responsibilities, Impact, Reflection framework. And we saw mistakes that most pre-meds make, like overemphasizing uniqueness. Uniqueness is the wrong takeaway instead of impact. Impact through stories and data. This is easily one of the strongest applications we've ever reviewed, and it's helped me understand what's working right now in medical school admissions, and I hope that it helps you too. But that's not all. If you want to see an application that earned a full ride scholarship, you'll find that one up here somewhere. And if this breakdown was helpful for you, maybe it would be helpful for one of your pre-med friends too. Share it, and we'd really appreciate that. I'll talk to you soon.